The scorching New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly on 13-year-old Danny Morrison as he swept the wooden planks outside McGrath's general store. His small frame bent against the broom handle that was almost as tall as he was. 3 years had passed since his parents died in a wagon accident, leaving him alone in the frontier town of Redemption Springs with nothing but the clothes on his back and the kindness of strangers who mostly viewed orphans as burdens rather than blessings. Old McGrath had taken Danny in out of necessity rather than charity, needing cheap labor for his expanding mercantile business, but unwilling to pay wages that would attract adult workers. Danny slept on a cot in the store's back room, ate leftovers from McGrath's table, and worked from dawn until well past dark for nothing more than basic survival. The work was hard but honest, and Danny had learned to be grateful for what little he had. He watched other orphans in the territory struggle without even the meager shelter that McGrath provided, and he understood that his situation, while far from ideal, was better than many alternatives. What made Danny different from other struggling orphans was his inexplicable optimism and his genuine kindness toward everyone he encountered, even those who treated him poorly. McGrath often grumbled about the boy's tendency to give away small items to people who looked hungry or desperate. But Danny couldn't help himself. He knew what it felt like to have nothing, and any opportunity to ease someone else's suffering seemed worth the risk of McGrath's displeasure. "You're too soft-hearted for this world, boy," McGrath would say, shaking his head at Danny's charitable impulses. "Frontier life requires harder edges than you've got." But Danny's gentle nature was not weakness, as some assumed. He had survived 3 years of hardship through a combination of resilience, intelligence, and an unshakable faith that people were fundamentally good, despite evidence to the contrary. The faith came from his mother, who had taught him during his early childhood that mercy and kindness were strengths rather than vulnerabilities. Afternoon that would test Danny's convictions, beyond anything he had experienced, began when 3 rough-looking men rode into Redemption Springs on horses that showed signs of being ridden hard for many miles. The leader was a tall, scarred man with cold eyes and a tied-down gun that marked him as someone accustomed to violence. His companions were younger but equally dangerous-looking, their movements carrying the predatory awareness of men who lived outside the law. Danny was restocking shelves inside the store when the 3 outlaws entered, their spurs jingling against the wooden floor and their presence immediately making the other customers nervous. McGrath's face went pale as he recognized the lead man from wanted posters that had been circulating throughout the territory. "Gentlemen," McGrath said with forced politeness, "what can I do for you?" The scarred outlaw, whom Danny would later learn was named Blackjack Coltrane, smiled without warmth. "We need supplies, food, ammunition, whiskey, and we need them quick." As McGrath hurried to fill the order, Coltrane's eyes swept across the store, taking in the layout, the other customers, and finally settling on Danny, who had frozen in place while restocking canned goods on a high shelf. "What are you looking at, boy?" Coltrane asked, his voice carrying an edge that made Danny's blood run cold. "Nothing, sir," Danny replied quickly, returning his attention to his work. "Just doing my job." But Coltrane had apparently taken offense at something in Danny's manner or appearance, because he strode across the store and grabbed the boy by his collar, lifting him off his feet with surprising strength. "I don't like the way you're looking at me." "Orphan," Coltrane snarled, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "You think you're better than me? Think you can judge a man by his appearance?" "No, sir," Danny gasped, his feet dangling several inches above the floor. "I wasn't judging anyone. I swear," McGrath attempted to intervene. "Mr. Coltrane, the boy meant no disrespect. He's just a simple orphan who works for me. Please, let him go." But Coltrane's rage, fueled by whiskey and whatever demons drove men to outlawry, had been triggered by something Danny couldn't understand. The outlaw threw the boy against the wall with brutal force, knocking the breath from Danny's lungs and sending explosions of pain through his small body. "I'll teach you respect," Coltrane growled, advancing on the fallen boy with murderous intent. What followed was a beating that Danny would remember for the rest of his life. Coltrane's fists and boots inflicted damage that went far beyond what the boy's slight frame could endure, breaking ribs and leaving bruises that would take weeks to heal. The other customers cowered in fear, and McGrath's protests were silenced by Coltrane's companions, who made it clear that any interference would result in similar treatment. Through the pain and terror, Danny never screamed or begged for mercy. Something in his mother's teachings about dignity and courage kept him silent, refusing to give Coltrane the satisfaction of hearing him cry out. This defiance seemed to enrage the outlaw even further, but it also eventually exhausted his fury. "That's what happens to people who disrespect Jack Coltrane," the outlaw announced to the frightened customers as he stood over Danny's crumpled form. "Let that be a lesson to all of you." The three outlaws took their supplies without paying and rode out of Redemption Springs, leaving destruction and fear in their wake. Dr. Samuel Peterson was summoned to treat Danny's injuries, his weathered face grim as he examined the extent of the damage. 3 broken ribs, extensive bruising, possible internal injuries, Peterson reported to McGrath. "This boy is lucky to be alive. Another few minutes of that beating and Coltrane would have killed him." Danny drifted in and out of consciousness over the following days, his young body struggling to heal from trauma that would have hospitalized most adults. During his fevered dreams, he saw his mother's face, heard her voice reminding him about the power of forgiveness and the importance of choosing mercy over vengeance. "The world has enough hate in it. Danny," his mother's voice seemed to whisper, "your calling is to add love, even when it seems impossible." When Danny finally regained full consciousness a week after the beating, his first words to McGrath were not about revenge or justice, but about whether the outlaws had paid for their supplies. "No, they didn't pay," McGrath replied, puzzled by the question. "They robbed me at gunpoint and nearly killed you. Why would you care about payment?" "Because," Danny said quietly through split lips, "if they needed supplies badly enough to steal them, they must be desperate. Desperate people do terrible things." McGrath stared at the boy in amazement. "Danny, that man nearly murdered you, and you're making excuses for him?" "Not excuses," Danny replied. "Just trying to understand. My mother always said that hurt people, and that the only way to break that cycle is through forgiveness." 2 months passed before Danny was fully recovered from the beating. His ribs healed, but his body bearing permanent scars from Jack Coltrane's brutal attack. The incident had made Danny something of a local legend in Redemption Springs, with people marveling at both his survival and his inexplicable lack of desire for revenge. Sheriff William Crane had organized a posse to pursue Coltrane's gang immediately after the attack, but the outlaws had vanished into the vast New Mexico wilderness, leaving no trail that could be followed. Wanted posters with substantial rewards were distributed throughout the territory, but weeks passed without any credible sightings. "They're probably in Mexico by now," Crane told McGrath during one of his visits to check on Danny's recovery. "Smart outlaws know when to disappear, and Coltrane survived this long by being smarter than most." But fate, or perhaps Providence, had different plans. 3 months after the beating, Sheriff Crane received word that a man matching Coltrane's description had been spotted near an abandoned mining camp about 30 miles south of Redemption Springs. The outlaw was reportedly alone, separated from his companions and possibly wounded. Crane organized another posse, this time including several experienced trackers and heavily armed deputies. The pursuit would be dangerous, as even a wounded Coltrane was likely more deadly than most men in their prime. But the opportunity to capture one of the territory's most wanted outlaws was too significant to ignore. Danny learned about the pursuit from conversations he overheard in the store, and something about the news filled him with unexpected concern rather than satisfaction. The image of Coltrane alone and wounded in the wilderness stirred something in Danny's heart that he couldn't fully explain, a compassion that seemed irrational given what the outlaw had done to him. "You're not thinking what I think you're thinking," McGrath said, noticing Danny's troubled expression. "The man nearly killed you, boy. He deserves whatever justice catches up with him." "I know," Danny replied quietly. "But I keep thinking about my mother's teachings, about mercy and forgiveness. What if this is a chance to prove that those principles aren't just words?" McGrath studied the boy's face with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Danny, you've got the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. But sometimes mercy is wasted on people who don't deserve it." Despite McGrath's warnings, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to be part of whatever was about to happen. When the posse assembled the following morning, Danny approached Sheriff Crane with a request that shocked everyone who heard it. "Sheriff, I want to come with you," Danny said, his young voice carrying a determination that seemed at odds with his slight frame. Crane looked down at the 13-year-old boy in disbelief. "Son, this is a manhunt for a dangerous criminal. It's no place for children, especially not the child he nearly murdered." "I'm not looking for revenge," Danny explained. "I just feel like I need to be there. I can't explain it better than that." The sheriff exchanged glances with his deputies, clearly uncertain how to respond to such an unusual request. Finally, he made a decision that would prove fateful for everyone involved. "All right, Danny, you can come along, but you stay at the back of the group, and you don't get involved in any confrontation. Understood?" The journey to the abandoned mining camp took most of the day, with the posse following tracks and signs left by someone who was either careless or too injured to cover their trail effectively. As they drew closer to their destination, the tension among the men increased, hands moving toward weapons and voices dropping to whispers. The mining camp was a collection of tumble-down buildings surrounding a played-out silver claim, abandoned years earlier when the ore ran out and the miners moved on to more promising prospects. The posse approached cautiously, spreading out to surround the site and prevent any possible escape. Sheriff Crane called out from cover. "Jack Coltrane! This is Sheriff Crane of Redemption Springs. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." For several moments, only silence answered the sheriff's challenge. Then a weak voice emerged from one of the collapsed buildings. "I can't come out, Sheriff. I'm hurt bad." The posse members looked at each other uncertainly, suspecting a trap. But as they drew closer, they could see that Coltrane's situation was genuine. The outlaw lay in the ruins of what had once been the camp's assay office, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle and his face gray with pain and dehydration. "My horse threw me 2 days ago," Coltrane explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Broke my leg and probably some ribs. Been lying here ever since, waiting to die." Sheriff Crane kept his weapon trained on the outlaw while his deputies secured the scene. "Where are your companions?" "Gone," Coltrane replied bitterly. "They decided a wounded partner was more liability than asset. Took my horse, my supplies, even my canteen. Left me here to rot." As the deputies began discussing how to transport the injured prisoner back to Redemption Springs, Danny pushed through the group and knelt beside Coltrane. The outlaw's eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been shame as he recognized the boy he had beaten months earlier. "You," Coltrane whispered. "The orphan from the store." Danny nodded, his hand reaching for his own canteen. "You look thirsty, Mr. Coltrane. Danny is offering water to the man who nearly killed him. What will happen next in this incredible act of mercy? Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see the powerful conclusion." The posse members stared in shocked silence as Danny Morrison held his canteen to Jack Coltrane's cracked lips, allowing the man who had beaten him nearly to death to drink from the precious water supply. The outlaw's hands trembled as he accepted the offering, his eyes never leaving Danny's face, as if searching for some explanation for this incomprehensible act of kindness. "Why?" Coltrane rasped after draining half the canteen. "After what I did to you, why would you help me?" Danny's response was simple but profound. "Because you're thirsty and I have water. That's reason enough." Sheriff Crane holstered his weapon and approached the unlikely scene, his weathered face showing emotions he couldn't fully express. "Danny, son, you know this man nearly killed you 3 months ago?" "Yes, sir," Danny replied, still kneeling beside Coltrane. "But right now he's not an outlaw or a criminal. He's just a hurt man who needs help. My mother taught me that mercy isn't something you give only to people who deserve it. If we only showed kindness to the deserving, none of us would ever receive it." The wisdom in those words, spoken by a 13-year-old orphan boy, seemed to hang in the air like smoke from a campfire. The deputies exchanged glances, their hardened frontier attitudes confronted by a moral clarity that most of them had abandoned years earlier. Coltrane's face crumpled with emotions that seemed to be tearing him apart from inside. "I don't deserve your mercy, boy. I beat you for no reason except my own anger and meanness. I'm exactly the kind of person your mother warned you about." "Maybe," Danny agreed. "But she also taught me that people can change if they're given the chance. You were shown no mercy by your companions when you were hurt. Maybe experiencing what it feels like to be abandoned will help you understand how your victims felt." Dr. Peterson, who had accompanied the posse to provide medical assistance if needed, moved forward to examine Coltrane's injuries. His professional assessment confirmed what everyone could see. The outlaw's leg was badly broken, he was severely dehydrated, and he had likely suffered internal injuries from his fall. "He needs to be transported back to town immediately," Peterson announced. "Whether we're treating a prisoner or a patient, I took an oath to provide medical care to anyone who needs it." The journey back to Redemption Springs was slow and difficult. With Coltrane secured to a makeshift stretcher and guarded by armed deputies who expected him to attempt escape despite his injuries. But the outlaw remained surprisingly docile, his eyes frequently finding Danny among the group, and his expression showing confusion that gradually transformed into something approaching wonder. When they finally reached Redemption Springs after nightfall, word of their arrival spread quickly through the town. Citizens gathered in the streets, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and anger as they recognized the man who had terrorized their community months earlier. "That's the one who beat young Danny," someone shouted from the crowd. "He ought to be hanged without trial." Other voices joined the call for immediate justice, and Sheriff Crane found himself facing a potential lynch mob despite his best efforts to maintain order. The situation was deteriorating rapidly when Danny climbed onto the sheriff's horse and raised his voice above the crowd. "Please, everyone, listen," Danny called out, his young voice somehow carrying across the angry murmur. "I know you're angry about what Mr. Coltrane did to me. I was angry too at first. But anger doesn't heal wounds, and revenge doesn't make things better." The crowd quieted somewhat, surprised by the boy's intervention on behalf of his attacker. McGrath pushed through the gathering, his face showing concern for Danny, but also pride in the moral courage his young employee was displaying. "Mr. Coltrane did a terrible thing," Danny continued. "He hurt me badly, and I carry scars from that beating that will probably last my whole life. But today, when I found him dying of thirst in that mining camp, I had a choice. I could have walked away and let him suffer like he made me suffer. Instead, I gave him water." Danny paused, gathering his thoughts before delivering the message that had been growing in his heart since his mother's death. "My mother used to tell me that the hardest and most important choice we ever make is how we respond to people who hurt us. We can choose revenge, which just creates more pain and anger. Or we can choose mercy, which opens the possibility for something better." Jack Coltrane, lying on his stretcher surrounded by armed guards, spoke up with a voice strengthened by genuine emotion. "The boy's right. I've spent my whole adult life choosing revenge and anger, and look where it's gotten me. Abandoned by my own partners, dying in the desert, and facing the rope for crimes I can't even remember half of." The outlaw's eyes met Danny's across the crowd. "But this orphan boy, who had every reason to hate me, chose to give me water when I was dying. That simple act of mercy has shown me more about what it means to be human than all my years of taking what I wanted by force." The moment stretched out as the crowd processed what they were witnessing. A hardened outlaw brought to genuine repentance by the forgiveness of a child he had brutalized. It was the kind of moral transformation that seemed to belong in Sunday sermons rather than real life, but everyone present could see that it was genuine. Judge Harrison Mitchell, who had been observing the scene from his office across the street, finally stepped forward to impose order on the situation. Mr. Coltrane will be held in our jail until he's recovered sufficiently to stand trial for his crimes. The law will take its course as it must. But what young Mr. Morrison has demonstrated today is that justice and mercy are not opposites. They're partners in the pursuit of a better world. Over the following weeks, as Coltrane recovered from his injuries in the town jail, something remarkable occurred. Danny visited the outlaw regularly, bringing books, conversation, and continued evidence of the mercy that had saved Coltrane's life in the desert. The visits were controversial, with some townspeople viewing them as naive and dangerous, but Danny remained convinced that his mother's teachings were correct. My mother used to say that everyone deserves at least one person who believes they can be better than their worst actions, Danny explained to McGrath. Maybe I'm that person for Mr. Coltrane. The transformation in Jack Coltrane was visible to everyone who observed him during his imprisonment. The angry, violent outlaw gradually gave way to a man who seemed genuinely remorseful for his past actions and determined to make whatever amends were possible before facing justice for his crimes. When the trial finally convened, Coltrane's lawyer attempted to use the outlaw's injuries and abandonment by his companions as mitigating factors. But Coltrane himself refused to hide behind excuses, pleading guilty to all charges and asking only that the court hear his testimony about what Danny's mercy had meant to him. I don't deserve forgiveness for what I've done, Coltrane told Judge Mitchell. I've hurt people, stolen from them, and left a trail of misery across this territory. But this young boy showed me that there's another way to live, a way based on kindness instead of cruelty. The outlaw's voice broke with emotion as he continued. When I was dying of thirst in that desert, Danny Morrison had every right to walk past me without a second thought. Instead, he gave me water. That simple act saved my life, but more importantly, it showed me that the mercy I never gave to others was still available to me. Judge Mitchell's sentence reflected both the seriousness of Coltrane's crimes and the genuine transformation that Danny's mercy had catalyzed. The outlaw would serve 20 years in territorial prison, with the possibility of parole if he continued to demonstrate the reformation he had begun. As Coltrane was led away to begin his sentence, he stopped beside Danny one final time. I can never repay what you gave me, son, but I promise you that I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to be the kind of man who deserves the mercy you showed me. Danny's response came from the same wellspring of compassion that had guided him throughout the ordeal. You don't have to earn mercy, Mr. Coltrane. That's the whole point. You just have to accept it and let it change you. The story of the orphan boy who offered water to the outlaw who beat him spread throughout the New Mexico territory, becoming a legend that inspired others to choose mercy over vengeance. Danny Morrison's simple act of kindness in the desert had demonstrated that forgiveness was not weakness, but the strongest force available to human beings. Years later, when Danny was grown and working as a teacher in Redemption Springs, he would tell his students about the day he found Jack Coltrane dying in the desert. The lesson was always the same, that choosing mercy over revenge was the hardest and most important decision any person could make, and that sometimes a simple cup of water offered to an enemy could change the world. What an incredible story of mercy triumphing over vengeance. Danny proved that forgiveness can transform even the hardest hearts. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more amazing tales of courage and compassion in the Old West. Share this powerful story with everyone who believes in the power of second chances. What moment moved you most in this journey from brutality to redemption? Let us know in the comments below.